as I said, I've been with Amarok Society since its early days, and so has Rotary, actually. Rotary International has been at our side for the majority of the time that we've been in operation, has been working with us in our goal of creating universal education. And that kind of renewed and enthusiastic commitment to me speaks of partnership. So when I talk about the things that we are doing in Bangladesh, in Pakistan, around the world, I really do mean the things that we are doing together, Rotary and Amarok. So I know Jem spoke to you a couple of years ago, so I'm not going to talk too much about what it is we do, but just as a quick refresher, what we're basically trying to do is answer the education crisis that has arisen in the world. And what that crisis is the fact that right now, 1 out of every 3 children in the world is growing up illiterate. So of the world's 650 million school-aged children, 250 million of them are growing up locked out of a quality education. They do not have access to a good education. Now, it is completely intuitive and completely natural to think, okay, there are millions and millions of children who are out of school. We need to build more schools. We need to build better schools. It's the first thing that anyone would think of. And because it is so intuitive, it's what everybody does. And unfortunately, the problem is not responding to that solution. The fact is, there are plenty of schools in the world. However, while building schools for children is a model that worked really well for us, it addressed your education, it addressed my education. I got to go to school that way. The problem is that no matter how many schools for children we build, there are always going to be millions and millions of children in the world for whom that kind of school is inaccessible. And there are a bunch of different reasons for it. One example is that a little boy might need to be working to help keep food on the table at home. So he might not be able to go to school from 8 o'clock until 2 o'clock because he needs to be doing labor somewhere or working in a sweatshop. Or maybe a little girl has a father who thinks that education doesn't belong to women, that it's not proper for her to have an education. So maybe she won't go to school for that reason. Or maybe her father supports her education, but when she's married at the age of, say, 12, as is common in many of these countries, her new husband will think that, she has no further need for education. Now it's her job to be a wife and to be a mother. So there are many, many, many reasons that children around the world are being kept from attending that kind of a school. So what we struck upon was the idea of going into the city slums and teaching mothers in those communities to become neighborhood teachers. So our model is this: we open up a school, we don't build one, we just rent a premise that's there. We bring in 25 uneducated mothers from the neighborhood. We teach them, we give them a basic education, and every day, each of those mothers goes home and she teaches 5 boys and girls in her neighborhood everything that she learned that day. So in a nutshell, what we're doing is we're creating a school that creates a whole bunch of little micro schools throughout the community. Now, we've been at this for about 15 years. And in that time, we've seen that this model is very effective. It creates a culture of education from within the family. And starting with mothers is a great way to create that culture of education. But we're also able to look at some of the effects that education has had on the wider community. So today I'm not going to talk too much about what it is we do. I just want to look at some of the things that we didn't predict, some of the things that happened that weren't our goal. We just wanted to bring education to the children, but the effect on the wider community of this kind of education. So I want to start by talking about where we're operating. Most of our schools are in Bangladesh right now, and we are operating in city slums. There are 2 reasons for operating in city slums. One of them is the fact that over the next 30 years, it is predicted that virtually all of the world's growth is going to be taking place in urban centers, in urban areas. So it's really important that we start to focus our attention on cities, not just on countrysides. And the other reason that we do it is because nobody else is, really. In these city slums, we find ourselves basically lonely in terms of other well-meaning NGOs, well-meaning charities doing work here. And I can understand that because these slums are very chaotic, very dangerous, and unpleasant places. They are populated by people, many of whom moved to the city from the countryside looking for work. They were so poor that they thought they had no choice but to come to the city and try to find a job. And unfortunately, when they got to the city, they found out that there are no jobs. So they move around from community to community throughout the city, trying their luck, and eventually they end up in these really, really wretched city slums. Everything is strewn with garbage. People are living entire families in a small one-room corrugated tin shack. And it's a very difficult life. And because of that, because of the difficulties of their life and the fact that people tend to not stay for long, the life expectancy is appallingly low, and the slums are such chaotic places. They don't form anything that we would regard as a community. There's no idea there of something like a community spirit or a neighborhood mentality. The people there very often do not have extensive social lives. Women in particular are very socially isolated. And a slum can rise and fall with the whim of the weather or with the whim of warring slumlords or city officials or anything like that. So the reason I want to tell you a little bit about these slums is so that you can have a bit of an understanding of what I'm going to talk to you about today, which is the stabilizing effect of education. Because I would say that every country at some point or another faces a disaster. It faces a crisis. Every country, the United States does, Canada does, Bangladesh certainly does. And that what really makes the difference to the effect of that disaster is what's happening in the country already when the disaster hits. What's already there? Is there accessible education? Is there economic opportunity? Is there political stability? Is there a trust in government? All of these things, is there infrastructure? They all conspire to predict what the outcome of the disaster will really be. And right now we're at this strange time in our history where every country is facing the same disaster all at once. We are all dealing with the economic and health impacts of COVID. So now, while we went in to teach children, something happened that wasn't really our purpose, which is the fact that by teaching mothers to teach children, we had 25 women in a room every day. And these 25 women all grew up thinking that education was not for women. So they were there every day challenging their idea of themselves, overcoming very often threats from their husbands or threats from other people in the community, redefining a woman's place in the world, and also learning how to teach and dealing with the difficulties of teaching, because teaching is, of course, a real job. So what happens when you have 25 women going on this journey together is that at the end of it, what you've really got are 25 very good friends. They tend to call each other sisters. So they basically are 25 sisters. So those 25 sisters are 25 connected families. And of course, they are teaching their children and their neighbors' children. So those 25 connected families are more like 75 or 100 connected families. And the mothers also have this practice of going and talking to other people, other families in the community about issues that matter to them. They like to raise awareness and they like to create dialogue in their community. So basically, the entire slum is now connected. Everybody knows each other. Everybody is invested in each other. So where there once was a slum, now there's a neighborhood. And as I'm going to show you, that makes the difference between life and death in a lot of cases. So this is Rina. Rina is one of our mothers that we teach. And when COVID hit Bangladesh, there was a lockdown. And the lockdown came with an economic downturn, as you would expect. And the hardest hit were the poorest of the poor. They were the families that we are teaching because their jobs disappeared. Nobody wanted to hire rickshaw drivers. Nobody wanted to hire housemaids. Nobody wanted to give to beggars. Even the sweatshops started closing down. And the government offered no help at all, or virtually no help. The government's response was to deliver a meal of rice and potatoes once a week to these families. So, you know, it's not enough to stave off starvation, for instance. Now, Rina looked around her community as the pandemic wore on and as the lockdown wore on, and she saw the obvious truth, which is that people were not going to survive. Very few of them had any kind of savings whatsoever. They had no money. They had no way of buying food for their children. So she went and she talked with all of her new sisters about it, her 24 sisters. And they devised a plan. The plan was that any of them who had any money to spare, any savings at all, they would go and buy rice and they'd give it to their neighbors who were the most in need. Now, of course, this wasn't a very sustainable plan because very soon they ran out of their savings. So instead what they did is they started going to markets nearby and asking the merchants at those markets to give customers the option to buy a little bit of extra rice as a donation to their community. And they also started going to richer neighborhoods door to door and asking for donations. And basically the result of this is that Rina kind of invented a food bank. And the reason I say invented is because there is no such thing as a food bank in Bangladesh. I have never seen anything like a food bank in any of these communities. But this has been a really big success. Rina and all of the mothers that she's learning beside, they have taken turns operating this. They have distributed hundreds and hundreds of pounds of rice and hundreds of pounds of vegetables throughout their community, and they have kept everyone safe. Nobody in their community has starved through the months of the lockdown. And that, I would say, is because Rina, through her education, now sees herself as a leader in her community. When the community was suffering, she and her sisters saw that this was their responsibility, that they had ownership over this community. And they've used that social power and the connection they had to each other and their ability to talk and do math reasonably with merchants in order to save lives. This here is Jahiner, and Jahiner is 16 years old. If you had met her 10 years ago, you would have seen this 6-year-old little girl, and she would have looked like any other 6-year-old little girl in one of these slums. So essentially waiting out a very short childhood before presumably being married at a very young age. In my experience, 13 is a very common age to be married in these slums. And then living a life as basically a housewife and a baby making machine. That's what Jahirun would have had in store for her. But of course, she was quite lucky because we opened up a school in her community. Her neighbor was one of the mothers we taught, and she taught Jahiner. So Jahiner eventually spent a few years learning from her neighbor, and then she is now in high school. And high school, fortunately, is free in Bangladesh. And she has her sights set on university. She has decided she is going to be a career woman. Now, in the summer, what she does is she helps her father sell vegetables. And this doesn't seem like a big deal, but you know, if she hadn't gone to school, this job would have been completely beyond her because you can't sell vegetables unless you know how to count, unless you know how to do math. And she's gotten quite good at selling vegetables. She's good as a saleswoman, but she's also really good at noticing the time at which vegetables start to look old and are going to be harder to sell. So what she started doing is she started taking all the vegetables she thinks she's not going to be able to sell and donating them to the Amarok school in her neighborhood to be redistributed throughout the community. Now, what that means is that so far she has this tiny amount of privilege. She has gotten a high school education, and she's already using that to make the world a better place. Now, if I were to try to define what education really means, it's this. Education is the process of giving the world to a child, so that Jahirun's life can actually belong to Jahirun. It doesn't have to belong to some randomly selected older husband, or the confines and patterns of her poverty, or the owner of some sweatshop. Jahirun's life can belong to Jahirun, for her to direct for herself, for her to decide. But there's a flip side to that, because not only are you giving the world to a child, you are also giving that child to the world. And this world needs that child. We need bright little girls like young Jahirun to grow into reasoning, independent, brave leaders. That's what this world needs. She's taken a little bit of education and she's already using it to bolster her community and help those who need it the most. Another good example of that is Shahiner, who is the 12-year-old there who's wearing the green scarf. When we started learning about COVID, of course, we started teaching all of our mothers about it too. We wanted them to have reliable information about what COVID was and how to act when it came, how to stay safe. And Shahiner was quite excited to start taking this task on herself. She decided that everyone in her slum was going to know all about how to deal with COVID. So this is a photo of her telling other people how long you have to wash your hands for, because 20 seconds can feel like a lifetime. Now, so she was already sort of enacting a kind of leadership. She's going around and she's helping her neighbors to stay safe. But she was facing her own challenge at home, which is that her parents were being threatened with eviction because they couldn't make ends meet. Now, there is a freeze on evictions in Bangladesh, but for a community of people for whom the law is always used as a means of control and never one of protection, laws like a freeze of eviction mean very little to them. They don't feel like the law responds to them, that they have access to it. The police in Bangladesh are incredibly corrupted, so that whoever has the most money basically wins the dispute. So eviction threats have been a real problem for us. Now, Shahiner came up with her own solution. She went to her landlord and she gave him an ultimatum, or not an ultimatum, she struck a deal with him. She said, if you let my family keep living in our little corrugated tin room, I will teach your children every day. I'll be their personal tutor, which he agreed to. Now, I kind of like this story. I like this story because I like to see, you know, a teenage girl standing up to probably a pretty intimidating landlord and using her education to help her family. But it doesn't answer the bigger problem of the evictions. We can't have all of the children in all of our schools striking deals with landlords in order to save themselves from eviction. This doesn't answer the problem, but I'll tell you what does. This new sense of community that these mothers have. Because if you have a group of 25 educated women who know how to read the paper and who are connected to all of the other mothers in all of our schools, who can talk to each other and who know the law, who know their rights, well, it's a lot harder to intimidate them. In one of our communities, one of the landlords was threatening eviction, and the mothers all banded together and said, go ahead and try it, but if we see one eviction, we are coming back with police. And that was enough to call his bluff, because nobody wants to deal with the police in these communities, not even the landlords, really. This is an example of how there is real strength in numbers and real strength in education. I think for me, the most stirring example of this is the fact that Bangladesh is facing an absolute, a very serious problem with child marriage. And the mothers in our schools have all decided that they are not going to allow it anymore. So anytime they hear about a little girl whose marriage is being arranged, they go and they talk to her parents and they convince them of why child marriage is harmful for the child and harmful for the community and harmful for the country. And because of that, right now in the communities in which we operate, there is an end to child marriage. They have eradicated it. Now, this isn't something we did. This is something the mothers did. All we had to do was give them education, because with education comes choice. And I personally believe that when people have a choice, are able to direct their own fate, they're going to make good choices. And I would say that the heroism of these women is a good example of that. Now, I have one last slide I want to show you. But just before I do, I want to say that these are challenging days. They're really challenging days for the communities that we're working in. They're also challenging days for us. And I know that they're challenging days for a lot of Rotary clubs too, because we are having to rethink how we do a lot of fundraising. But at the same time, as we need to be doing a lot of fundraising, this is also the time when the mothers that we are teaching need us the most, because these communities are facing down famine and facing down a lack of job opportunity and facing down landlords who would exploit them. But I take a lot of encouragement from the fact that by putting one school in one of these communities has made all the difference in the world. These mothers have reliable information now. They can read the paper, they can know their rights, they know what COVID is, and they can stay safe. They cannot be abused by exploitive landlords. They stand up together. They protect their entire community from famine, from starvation, from disease. Adding one school to one of these communities not only has given an opportunity for hundreds and hundreds of children to graduate from elementary school to go to high school. Now we have children going into university. Soon we're going to see those university students graduating to become doctors and lawyers and engineers. But aside from all of that, a single school in one of these communities makes that community resilient. These people can take care of their own. They can take care of themselves. And so on behalf of all of the thousands and thousands of lives that have been affected through this program, I want to say thank you as Rotarians for standing by our side through all of this. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Gabriel. I said that your father's talk was probably the best presentation that I had ever seen in a Rotary Club meeting, and I've been to a lot of them in 18 years. You're a chip off the old block. I'll just say that. That was a very great presentation. Well done. I didn't hear one and I've been in Toastmasters for a long time, and I still say all the time. You're a great public speaker. Also, the information was great. Even though you didn't fill in, or you didn't give a lot of background that Jem covered, you still got it in there by just the way you just talked about how the what you're doing has impacted the or how the things that you didn't expect. There was some of that too that he talked about when we had the previous, that there was some unexpected things that developed when you started this program. I'm going to start off the questions. I have two questions. One of them, nature of follow-up, and then one I didn't get to ask the last time. I remember when your dad was at our club, I asked, like, well, what about the husbands? These women are basically wives that are expected to stay at home. They're out teaching kids and going to school and getting educated, and they're not educated. Is there any resentment or anything? And he told a story about how a lot of the women did, some of them got beat by their husbands who didn't like this. There was resistance. But then he shared something that some of them would, as much as they would criticize their wives for doing this, they would be found near the door when the women were teaching the kids, and they would be picking up things from their wives, and that resulted in them having better opportunities and more respect for their wives. So I was wondering, has there been any improvement in the husband's treatment of their wives as a result of your program? That's my first question. I'll ask the second one after you get a chance. Ask the second one after you have a chance to answer the first one.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And you're right. It was a real challenge for us. Very often we had mothers who were getting beaten every day that they came to attend, which in my mind, I always remember that because it shows basically how courageous they were, that they were doing this for their children. Things have gotten a lot easier in two ways. One is that these husbands weren't malicious men. They genuinely grew up being told that if your wife gets an education, she's going to leave you, and good luck being a single father. She's going to tear apart the fabric of society. And once they find out that that's not the case, they actually get very excited and very proud of their wives. And the thing is that these men are so proud of their wives, they break to men in other neighborhoods. And then those men go home and ask their wife, hey, why aren't you in school? My friend, his wife is like a straight A student. What are you doing? So now when we expand into new slums and new communities, we're doing it by invitation. And very often we are just having a much easier time of it. But also something else kind of happens too, which is that I'm trying to find the right way to put this. There's a new normal that happens where, there are small-minded men, there are recalcitrant men that we'll never convince. But when an entire community starts seeing this group of women as being sort of the beating heart of the community, they see these women as being their champions, really, taking care of all the children in the community. What happens is that those men no longer find themselves within the comfort of what's accepted. It's no longer accepted that you beat your wife. That's not a thing you can do anymore. So even the few men who would maybe want to do that, it's not socially accepted in these communities now, which is a nice thing.
That's quite amazing. My second question, and then I'll let other people ask some questions. I know there's going to be some. And Jim may have covered this in his original presentation, but if he did, I don't remember. How did you guys stumble on this model in the first place? I mean, when the first time I heard it, I just thought it was so improbable, so unlikely to succeed. And yet, you've been doing it for 15 years with amazing success that I doubt anybody could have predicted. How did you guys figure out that this was something to do?
Well, I'm going to just give all the credit there to my parents.
Well, you weren't old enough. I know that.
History. Yeah, exactly. They have a history in First Nations education in Northern Canada. And one of the problems with First Nations education is there's never enough resources to do anything. So they had a practice of looking for what the underused resource in a community is. What's here that's not being used that we could use? And when they first started looking into these communities in Bangladesh, the obvious answer there was the women. The women are not being used to their full potential. They are expected to basically stay in their little hovel all day long, doing some cooking and maybe some begging. But that's about it. And that there's a lot of human potential there if we could find a way to use it. So it was just about looking for the underused resource.
I have a question too. Could I ask it?
Sure, David, and then Bob.
Gabriel, my question is similar to Philip's, but I'd like to dig a little deeper if you don't mind. What was the genesis or what motivated your parents to get involved in something like this? Because it just seems like a phenomenal thing.
Well, we first moved to Bangladesh. I was 16 at the time, and my mother had been hired by an organization in Bangladesh that had a job of bringing about changes to the public school system. So she was doing that, but we saw that there was a much bigger problem than an insufficient school system. And that's the fact that, man, all day long, we could see hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of children who weren't in school at all. So that was the origin of it, is just looking at this problem and seeing behind this problem was a much bigger problem. And once we started to do research into it, we unfortunately found out that this is not a Bangladesh problem. This is a world problem that really, really needs to be addressed. So that was kind of the general impetus for it.
And yet it seems like that would take a tremendous amount of passion or stick-to-itiveness or something, right?
It did.
Yeah, I don't know if he can answer that question about, why they got involved in this. I would just say that your father impressed me as just a really compassionate human being. And I think that's probably the underlying reason that he just wanted to make a difference in the world. That's what I take away. Bob, you had a question.
Yeah, Gabriel, first of all, thank you very much for joining us. And I too was really moved by the talk your dad gave at our club a couple or 3 years ago. And then I saw him again at the district conference here last year. And, it was pretty touching because he showed a clip of a girl that was teaching what she'd learned to younger people, but her grandfather was also sitting in as well. So she was not only teaching younger people, but she was teaching her grandfather. I mean, that was kind of mind blowing. I do have a question though. It's a huge population. How many boots on the ground do you have? If you've got groups of 25 women, you must have a pretty good organization to organize that many groups to have a significant impact. So you must have quite a few folks that are working, right?
We do. We're quite organization light.
Mm-hmm.
That is to say that all of our employees there are Bangladeshi.
Mm-hmm.
We have one teacher for every school.
Okay.
And very often a teacher assistant. And those teachers we are trying to hire out of the mothers. So every now and like with every class of mothers,
good.
One mother who really shows like really good ability for learning and for helping out her other classmates.
Right.
So we like to find those people and promote them.
So you're replicating it from inside then.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, so that's my first question. And my second question is, what are the financial needs? How would the organization use the resources? What's the biggest need you have?
Yeah, financial needs are, we want to keep growing. That's the answer there. There's always a need for us to be opening more and more schools. So sort of general operation needs. As we get larger, of course, we get a certain economy of scale. That is quite helpful. Our annual budget is about 250,000 right now, but we would like to be growing a lot larger than that in order to get into as many communities as possible.
And
I
I'm
would
sure
like that to be 250 million, frankly.
And I'm sure you're paying, I'm sure your organization is paying the teachers of those 25 women. They're receiving pay for that, I would imagine, right?
The mothers themselves do not receive any pay from us.
Okay. But the ones that are teaching the 25,
Yes, they are. That's right.
good, 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 good. Okay. I was just kind of curious because I'd like to know, you know, what needs to be done to help you meet the need.
Right. Yeah, I understand. Thank you.
Yeah, our club is very supportive of your mission, and glad that you're doing this update, because I think we sometimes forget about the causes we care about, and it's good to have a reminder, because we should just have this one on our speed dial every year and send a check off. So I think maybe we'll start doing that on a more regular basis. So thank you for the reminder. Georgia. Yep, you're on mute.
Yep, thank you. Thank you, Gabriel, for joining us tonight and updating us and so forth. When one of the children going to the school each day, my question is, are they, when they become high school age, after homeschooling, if you will, are they prepared to go to the public high school there?
Yes, they are. Fortunately, there's no real problem in terms of student records that we face. Bangladesh has a real fixation on exams. So to get from grade 1 to grade 2, there's an exam to do that. So getting into high school is just a matter of passing the entrance exam into it.
Okay, thank you.
Well, it's quite fortunate for us, actually. Yes.
Sorry, Gabriel, you had that was the worst section of your internet. I didn't hear a word you said.
Oh, well, I'm just drawing a blank at the moment, actually.
Oh, okay.
Just that we don't really have any issue because entering into high school is just a matter of passing exams. It has nothing to do with, they don't really keep student records or anything like that.
Okay, thank you.
Does anyone else have any questions of Gabriel?
I have a question of you, Phil. Do you have the information that's necessary for us to be able to pass funds on to them?
Oh, certainly. I have the contact information for both Gabriel and Tanis, his mom. So I'm sure they'll direct it in the right direction. Yes, Georgia.
I have another quick question. Gabriel, you said that the mothers go to school every day and then they return home and teach the children what they learned that very day. Did I get that correctly?
Yep, that's the gist of it. They won't necessarily be teaching a child what they learned that very day, because we'll spend some days doing things like working on how to teach, and helping develop materials such as games and stories and that sort of thing. But yeah, that's the essential model of it.
And then is the organization providing the books and the paper and the pencils and just the basic needs for school?
Yes, we are.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I hadn't picked up on from the previous presentation about the mothers. I for some reason thought that they got educated and then they would teach the kids. That isn't really that efficient. So it makes a lot more sense the way you guys are doing it, teaching them a portion and then they share that. Now, what about my last question, after the mothers have had their initial round of teaching, do they, I don't know what their agreement with you is, do they teach another group of kids, or they've done their part and they do something else, or how does that work?
Usually they stay with us and just find 5 more children to teach.
Okay. It's because
Every now and then a mother will. Yeah, exactly.
You said every now and then a mother will, and then I cut you off. Sorry about that.
Every now and then a mother might leave the community or might cede her place to a new woman entering into the school, but generally they like to stay within the school, which I can understand because that's, you know, where they get a lot of purpose from the teaching. And as like Rotarians would know, the idea of who profits best, who serves most.
And I'm sorry, I lied. I do have one more question. I just realized that, so the mothers learn a certain amount of information, but there's a number of different grade levels for the kids. How does that work? Do they go to, do they get further education for higher levels, or is there just a certain amount like you teach that's necessary to prepare for the high school level?
So we teach the mothers sort of up to a high school level.
Okay.
And then when they take new children in, they're just more prepared for that second batch of children than they had been for the first. But we can keep working with them on honing their teaching abilities.
All right. Anyone else have any other questions? Vicky, you're on mute.
Gabriel, thank you. I agree that it was a very inspirational presentation, and we appreciate you coming to share that with share the story with us. My question is, and it's probably a stupid one based on the photos and so forth, but I'm just thinking about, you know, the 21st century nature of our world, and the idea that you know, when they get to high school, I know you said they test and they can get into it, but is it like here where you almost need to have a computer at that point, or how does that whole technology piece play into either probably not so much what you're doing now, but into your thinking of, you know, how to prepare them for that world?
That's a really good question. What we've actually done is we've really, through the help of Rotary, we have distributed some smartphones and iPads throughout these schools so that some children can get a kind of digital literacy on their side. Now, it's not the same as it is here where, you know, if I was going to high school in Toronto, for instance, I would absolutely need a laptop in order to function in that high school. There's no way to do it really these days without a computer. That's not the case in Bangladesh. They still tend to be very, very reliant on notebooks and textbooks and pencils, basically, which is to our advantage. And what's really taking off in the developing world isn't computers, it's smartphones are kind of where the developing world is headed.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I would say in the developed world too, it's a pet peeve of mine that can't do some functions on the website. You have to do it on the downloaded app on your smartphone. So that's an old man gripe. Anyway, does anyone else have any questions? Going once, going twice. All right, well, on behalf of our club, Gabriel, well done, sir. Thank you very much. We appreciate it, and I'm sure we'll be in touch.